Hello, welcome to the YESS Yarn Ethically and Sustainably Sourced Standard and Workbook Release webinar. I will turn it over to Maren Wilson to get started.
Welcome and thank you for joining us today. We are excited to share with you the work a Responsible Sourcing Network has done to create the initiative, YESS, Yarn Ethically and Sustainably Sourced, and to introduce you to the YESS Cotton Standard and the YESS Assessment Workbook and Summary Findings, both of which were released today. Before we begin, there are a few logistics to cover. All participants are currently in listen-only mode. Please type any questions into the question box on the GoToMeeting app, and we will address them during the Q&A session at the end of the webinar. This webinar is being recorded. Although you may know them already, I would like to provide a bit of background on the two presenters, Patricia Jurwitz and Liz Muller. Patricia Jurwitz is founder and vice president of Responsible Sourcing Network, also known as RSN, a project of the nonprofit organization As You Sow. RSN is the creator of and houses all of the YESS documents and resources. Liz Muller, our second presenter, is the lead author of the YESS Standard Trainings and Tools. On behalf of GAP Inc., she acted as the first chairperson of the Better Cotton Initiative, or BCI. And as a consultant, she has advised cotton merchants and supported Cotton Council International. Liz has experience developing and applying due diligence framework for responsible commodity supply chain development by the OECD. And Liz led one of 3 original global firms that conducted audits of smelters and now trains auditors to help smelters prepare for audits. With that, I will turn it over to Patricia.
Thank you, Maren, for the introduction, and thank you everyone for joining us today. During today's webinar, I will explain briefly about what Yarn Ethically and Sustainably Sourced Initiative is all about. Then I will provide a very brief history of the YESS initiative and describe all of the work that went into creating the YESS Standard and Workbook. I will turn it over to Liz to review the YESS Standard and its due diligence approach, and she will also explain the YESS Workbook, which is the main tool that will be used to assess spinners. Next, we will hear from 2 of the stakeholders that have been involved in the development of YESS. I will go over proposed future events and activities we would like to complete over the next 2 years. And at the end, we plan on leaving at least 15 minutes for Q&A. However, if your question does not get answered during the webinar, we will follow up with you afterward. I know some of you may already be familiar with YESS, and some of you may have been on our introductory webinars before, which, if you haven't, you can find on the Responsible Sourcing Network website. I'm going to start today from a place where I usually end: what YESS can do for you. By supporting YESS in whatever capacity is appropriate for your organization, you will be able to meet your company's compliance requirements for anti-slavery legislation and supply chain regulations in various countries. You will help incentivize and increase greater demand for all of the farm-level initiatives which help farmers, farm workers, and our planet. You will support an effective and transparent due diligence approach throughout the entire supply chain. And most importantly, you will help eliminate modern slavery from cotton production globally. Thank you for joining us today to find out how our new initiative, YESS, Yarn Ethically and Sustainably Sourced, is going to help transform the cotton yarn supply chain. We established YESS to cultivate transparent and accountable supply chains, as well as encourage collaboration in the cotton sector. Why is this needed? Because we estimate over 1.5 million people are being forced to pick cotton today. YESS aims to prevent and mitigate forced labor in cotton production by conducting due diligence training and assessing yarn spinners for their ability to identify and address this harm. Why yarn spinners? Because they are the key control point. They blend together cotton from many sources and provide transparency to the countries and regions from where they buy their cotton. The picture on the lower right is how numerous bales of cotton from different sources are stacked next to one another at the beginning of the yarn making process. The YESS Standard and Workbook were created to accomplish the mission of YESS, and we created our scope to stay focused. Although there is more we'd like to take on, we think it's in our best interest to start with a narrow scope, and we can always expand it in the future. So I'll go over quickly what YESS does and what YESS does not do. What it does do is implement a risk-based due diligence approach, putting the highest risks first. It focuses on management systems and material control systems so that we can assess if a spinner has the processes in place to identify and address harm. And it is designed to assess a spinner only once a year. By essentially managing the assessments, we can minimize the need for each brand to conduct its own assessments. There are activities which we are not including in the YESS initiative at this time. YESS does not address labor conditions inside a spinning mill. We know there are efforts such as SLCP that are focused on converging factory labor conditions, so we don't want to duplicate that effort. It is not creating a check-the-box audit or a code of conduct. Since the assessors are looking at the management systems, understanding a spinner's process involves a lot of discussion. YESS does not certify a product, and it is not looking to address all human rights and decent work issues in cotton fields. It is only focused on forced labor. So what has YESS done to create the YESS standard and workbook? The impetus to start the YESS initiative was a lack of accountability for downstream suppliers. In 2014, the Responsible Minerals Initiative started a program to verify that smelters were not processing conflict minerals. Also in 2014, RSN issued the Cotton Sourcing Snapshot Report. For it, we surveyed 49 brands and retailers to learn what they were doing to address forced labor cotton in their supply chains. Results showed that nearly 80% of the surveyed companies did not audit the spinning mills. And after seeing both the success of conflict mineral program and the lack of accountability with yarn spinners, I started wondering if the same could be done in the apparel sector. It was clear to me that a robust industry-wide initiative was needed to identify and address the harm of forced labor in the upstream cotton supply chain. So in 2015, I decided to write a business plan to engage yarn spinners. It was originally called the Spinner Verification Initiative, and later its name evolved into the YESS Initiative. The CNA Foundation funded us to have Made By and Solidaridad conduct a feasibility study. They interviewed over 40 stakeholders from the global cotton and apparel sectors to determine if we should move forward with YESS. The answer was yes, but keeping in mind a few key components to our approach, such as not creating YESS in a silo and keeping the focus on addressing only forced labor in the cotton sector. In 2016, with funding from Humanity United and the Walt Disney Company's Supply Chain Investment Program, RSN launched the YESS Initiative. We hired consultant Liz Muller in 2017, and together Liz and I researched the cotton sourcing procedures of spinning mills in Turkey, Bangladesh, and India. In addition, we visited several cotton gins in India and Turkey. We circulated an online survey to gather further information from spinning mills located in other countries. In the spring of 2018, we drafted the YESS standard and circulated it for public consultation. We received back over 200 comments. We also spoke with a number of labor experts and experts from the cotton industry to ensure we were drafting a standard that was both credible and practical. With the public consultation process, multiple stakeholders asked us about our methodology for defining forced labor, as well as the countries that are determined to be in the high-risk category. These inquiries encouraged us to take a deeper dive into our methodology. We used the ILO's report, Hard to See, Harder to Count, and looked at the indicators applicable to cotton harvesting. We then assembled research for cotton-producing countries. If a country had evidence of 3 or more forced labor indicators, then we included it on YESS's high-risk list. Our country determination methodology is on the YESS webpage, as well as in the YESS standard as Annex 4. In the future, we plan to continue to refine and deepen our methodology and research. We considered and incorporated the public comments into the draft YESS standard and updated it where applicable. We then prepared training webinars and assessment tools, and last fall, Liz and I conducted feasibility assessments of the revised draft standard and workbook at 5 spinning mills in Bangladesh, Turkey, and Uzbekistan. With proper training and resources, we learned it is doable for spinning mills we visited to implement the YESS standard. During the past few months, we have addressed all of the issues that arose during the feasibility assessments, worked closely with our multi-stakeholder network on any outstanding issues, and refined the YESS standard and workbook to be ready to pilot with a broader set of spinning mills. The result of all this research and input from numerous stakeholders is the release of the YESS standard and workbook today. With that introduction and history, Liz will now provide a high-level overview of the YESS standard and accompanying assessment workbook and summary of findings.
Thank you, Patricia. The YESS standard seen here is a specific practical framework to assess the systems and practices that spinning mills implement to avoid sourcing cotton that may have been produced with forced labor. It has been created to align with the approach of the OECD due diligence guidance with a focus on forced labor in cotton production. Before I explain the YESS standard, I would like to review some basic terms I will use throughout this presentation and whenever we speak of due diligence. Due diligence is acting with reasonable care and investigating an issue before making a decision. Due diligence is a constant process to identify, assess, and mitigate risks. It is not simply a series of written policies and procedures that operate in silos. Harm is what OECD defines as negative human rights and environmental impacts on the environment, communities, or individuals along an enterprise's supply chain. In the context of the YESS standard, harm is forced labor in cotton production. Risk in the YESS standard is the actual or potential exposure to harm or forced labor of individuals or groups in cotton production. The YESS standard adopts a risk-based approach, one in which you apply different levels of due diligence proportionate to the risk faced by the enterprise. And finally, a red flag is a concern, discrepancy, or other suspicious activities in a spinner's supply chain. This may include risk of forced labor, but could also be such things as non-routine transportation routes or suspicious or lack of documentation. I would also like to mention how we refer to different forms of cotton a spinner could receive, or cotton inputs, as we say in the standard. Unprocessed cotton inputs is cotton lint that has not been spun into yarn or otherwise processed, at least beyond ginning. Processed cotton inputs is cotton that has been processed. This could include spinning wastage or byproduct, yarn, fabric, or garments, as is or deconstructed. Before I introduce the YESS standard, I would like to remind us all of the 6 steps of the OECD due diligence guidance, upon which the YESS standard is based. Embed policy and management systems, identify potential and actual harm, cease, prevent, or mitigate harm, track performance, communicate activities in progress, and enable remediation. As a reminder, YESS is focused on addressing forced labor and risks in cotton production. Therefore, it does not apply the OECD due diligence guidance to a spinner's own operations beyond their due diligence management system. With these basics covered, let me provide a high-level introduction to the YESS standard. Please note that this is a very brief introduction, and a more detailed explanation of the YESS standard is available via a recorded webinar on YESS's website. Let's begin discussing risks. Risks in a supply chain can be divided into 2 categories: risks associated with the material and risks associated with the supplier, including its processes. Material-related risks are primarily linked to the geographic origin of the cotton lint. Specifically, if it originated in one of the 9 high-risk countries listed in the YESS standard. Regarding the risk associated with the supplier, a Know Your Supplier, or KYS process, should be implemented. Now I would like to explain supply chain risks, low and high risk supply chains. This is different from, but includes high and low risk countries in which cotton was produced. High-risk supply chains could include lint produced in a high-risk country, or there could be transaction or supplier risks. As shown in this slide, a supply chain must not meet any of the following conditions for it to be considered low risk. Cotton is produced in a high-risk country or is labeled originating from a multi-country region and not from a single country of origin, such as the Commonwealth of Independent States or CIS. Cotton originates in a country with limited or no cotton production. There are discrepancies, inconsistencies, or other issues identified during the review of material, including lint qualities and characteristics, and documentation that have not been addressed. If any of these situations is identified in a spinner's supply chain, then those supply chains would be considered high-risk supply chain and subject to the requirements of high-risk sourcing. If a spinner purchases cotton associated with a high-risk supply chain, additional due diligence must be done to ensure the cotton inputs received pose a low risk of forced labor during its production. This means a spinner is expected to fully understand the factual circumstances in its supply chain to be able to identify risks related to the responsible sourcing policy and assess whether or not these can be mitigated in order to continue to source from those areas. In other words, a spinner must map their supply chain, including all actors, points of mixing, etc., back to the farm, gin, or farming community and assess whether or not there are any risks associated with these circumstances. The spinner must also ensure transaction documents validate the plausibility of origin down to a farm or gin that has been determined to be low risk to forced labor. Lastly, they must develop a process around identifying, assessing, and managing risks. I would like to note that YESS has not yet evaluated the assessment of forced labor and implementation of chain of custody systems under farm-level schemes such as Better Cotton Initiative, Cotton Made in Africa, and other schemes. We hope these schemes will cover the additional due diligence that is required in high-risk supply chains. If this is the case, a spinner would need to validate that the cotton they receive was actually produced under the appropriate scheme. Spinners are expected to have management systems to conduct due diligence to identify, address the risks we have just discussed. I recognize that this may be an overly simplified introduction into the YESS standard, especially for those of you who are new to the YESS initiative. I encourage you to review the webinars on YESS's website that provide a bit more detail about the YESS standard. Now I will go over the YESS workbook that would be used during a YESS assessment of a participating spinner. The YESS Assessment Workbook and Summary of Findings, or YESS Workbook, is an Excel workbook with separate worksheets or tabs used to capture key information about a spinner's sourcing strategy and due diligence management system. The sections of the workbook are Overview. This provides a description of each section, and I won't review this today. Supplier Profile, Sourcing Dashboard, Management System Checklist, Transaction Details. A separate worksheet is provided for the cotton input categories: low risk unprocessed cotton or lint, high risk cotton, and processed cotton, such as yarn, fabric, or lint from deconstructed fabric or wastage. A risk mitigation action plan. This is only required for spinners that source high risk cotton. And finally, a summary of findings. Each worksheet within the workbook can be accessed by clicking on the appropriate tab, which are shown at the bottom of the screen here. Brief introductions are provided in each section and subsection of the workbook. It is also important to remember that I am providing a very quick overview of the workbook today. Any spinner that would be using the workbook would be trained before they are asked to complete their sections or participate in a YESS assessment. Let's review each of these sections now. Please note I'm only providing a screenshot of a portion of the worksheet. The facility information and instructions have been omitted. The spinner profile documents the basics about a spinning facility and operating capacities. As you can see on your screen, spinners should indicate what type of spinning they perform, ring spun or open end, or if it's a vertical facility, and the types and quantities of cotton received under various farm level schemes such as BCI, Cotton Made in Africa, etc. Next, the sourcing dashboard captures specifics related to the spinner's sourcing strategy for each category of cotton inputs, such as the type of cotton input, volumes, countries of origin, number and types of suppliers. This information must be completed by all spinners and will be used by an assessment team to prepare for the assessment, including thinking about what transactions to inspect during the on-site visit. An additional table titled High-Risk Country of Origin Sourcing Details provides more detailed information about cotton inputs from high-risk sources or origins. You can see that it includes the name of GINs if the supplier accepted the spinner's sourcing policy and other detail required for high-risk cotton inputs. This is only required for spinners that source from one of the 9 high-risk countries. Next is the management system checklist. It is the cornerstone of the workbook. It summarizes detail of the spinner's due diligence management system for each requirement of the YESS standard. It is organized by the 6 steps of due diligence per the YESS standard and OECD due diligence guidance, with the relevant section of the standard cited in column C, or the second column you see here, of the checklist. I don't have enough time to walk through all of the questions, but I would like to explain how it is organized and should be completed. The checklist lists each requirement of the standard, or overarching requirement, in the column titled Overarching Question, and each sub-requirement under the overarching requirement is listed under the column entitled Criteria. We have bundled the multiple criteria for each requirement or overarching question for ease of completing the workbook. For any specific criteria that is not met to satisfaction or warrants a comment, the assessment team can still provide detail in the next column where they are asked to list the evidence, and that could be a title of a relevant procedure or form, for example, or provide an explanation for their conclusion, whether it be conformant or non-conformant, which will be documented in the adjacent and last column of the management system checklist. Please note that section C of the management system checklist sees, prevent, or mitigate harm in the spinner's supply chain is only required of a spinner sourcing from high-risk sources. Next, there are 3 different worksheets to capture details on each transaction of cotton inputs a spinner received during the assessment period. One for low-risk unprocessed cotton inputs, one for high-risk unprocessed cotton inputs, and a separate one for processed cotton inputs. Information required in this section can be captured in a different format, for example, a report generated by the spinner's inventory management system, but must include all required information for every transaction as listed in the appropriate appendix of the standard for the type of cotton input. In the slide, I am presenting the information required for low-risk sources of unprocessed cotton inputs. It lists all of the detail that are required for low-risk sources. The first portion on the top of the screen captures basic information such as the type of cotton, country of origin, name of supplier will be captured for all transactions received during the assessment. Additional information, including citing evidence of transactions and its origin, is only required for transactions that will be selected for inspection during the assessment. followed by the assessment team's comments and conclusions. The separate worksheet for high-risk source of unprocessed cotton inputs would include additional documents and evidence required by the standard for high-risk sources. Similarly, the processed cotton transaction sheet captures required detail for each processed cotton input transaction, wastage, byproduct, or yarn from spinners. These would be completed for all transactions received during the assessment period. Please note that per the YESS standard, processed cotton inputs from spinners that are non-conformant with the YESS standard must be listed and information completed in the appropriate worksheet for the category of unprocessed inputs, either high risk or low risk. That is to say that the cotton within that processed cotton input must be the origin must be understood and due diligence must be conducted all the way back to the origin. That is in the situation where the spinner is a non-conformant with the YESS standard. The risk mitigation section is only required by spinners actively sourcing from high-risk supply chains. It is used to document a spinner's plan to cease, prevent, or mitigate contributing to harm from forced labor in cotton production. The final worksheet, the summary of findings, is completed by the assessment team and with comments provided by the spinner. It captures findings, non-conformances, observations, recommendations, as well as continuous improvement opportunities and achievements. We have kept the summary of finding at a high level because all of the supporting detail is captured elsewhere in the workbook, such as the management system checklist and transaction detail sheets. Wow, we've just covered a lot of information. There will be an opportunity to ask questions at the end of the webinar, but first I would like to ask Maren to introduce two of YESS's stakeholders that would like to provide a few words regarding their experience working with YESS and the value they see YESS providing to the cotton and apparel industry.
Thank you, Liz. First, we'll hear from Chanel Orton, who is the Manager of Responsible Materials and Traceability at VF Corporation and one of the YESS Working Group members. Chanel assisted us in organizing 2 of the mill visits where we conducted feasibility assessments of the YESS standard in Bangladesh and Turkey last fall. Go ahead, Chanel.
Thank you. As Maren mentioned, I manage traceability for VF Corporation, focusing mainly on our high impact materials. VF uses a lot of cotton in a wide range of our products, and we understand the serious human rights abuses that occur within the cotton industry. We have strict policies in place to prohibit cotton sourced from Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, and Syria to ensure that we are not inadvertently funding modern-day slavery in those countries. VF is also one of the signatories of RSN's Uzbek and Turkmen cotton pledges. However, we realize that in addition to creating these policies and signing these pledges, we need a robust framework in place to verify our sourcing and substantiate these claims. We joined the YESS Working Group last year because we aligned with their objective and risk-based approach in developing the standard for our spinning mills. Our research has shown us that spinning mills are the gatekeepers in the cotton supply chain. So if we can monitor the flow of materials at this tier, we can effectively manage our risk. We also recognize the opportunity to enhance transparency across the industry through this program. The demand for transparency is only increasing, and we want to be proactive in finding a solution. We recognize the value in taking an industry-wide approach with YESS. Spinning mills will likely be more willing to participate in this program if the request is coming from multiple customers, and this participation from the spinning mills is critical to the overall success of the program.
Great, thank you, Chanel. Now we will hear from Kelly Chung, Sustainability, Social Responsibility, and Public Policy at the Walt Disney Company. We are grateful that Disney's Supply Chain Innovation Program funded the Responsible Sourcing Network to research and develop the YESS standard and workbook. Over to you, Kelly.
Thanks. So I sit on Disney's global public policy team, where I focus primarily on policy and regulatory developments related to labor, human rights, and responsible supply chains. And in this capacity, I also manage Disney's Supply Chain Investment Program, which is a corporate grant fund intended to foster innovative and scalable solutions that address systemic labor issues in global supply chains. This program aligns with our longstanding efforts to foster safe, inclusive, and respectful workplaces wherever Disney-branded products are produced. And as Maren mentioned, it's through this program that Disney has made a grant to support the development of the YESS model and standard. Disney is a signatory of RSN's Uzbek Cotton Pledge. However, we don't directly source cotton, and tracking cotton or any other materials upstream in the supply chain is particularly challenging for Disney because the production of most Disney-branded product is done by independent licensees, vendors, and retailers. We've been exploring ways to gain better visibility into the upstream supply chain for Disney-branded products and various ways for Disney to impact and engage on those operations. So when RSN's YESS initiative came to our attention probably a little over 2 years ago, we saw it as a really promising opportunity to help develop a model of supply chain traceability and visibility in the cotton sector. The need for this level of due diligence has only grown more clear over the past couple of years as a growing number of countries have implemented new regulations and due diligence reporting requirements. And Disney is really pleased to have been able to support the development of this initiative. And I also want to just say congratulations to the team. They put a lot of hard work, a lot of effort over the past 2 years, and they've been really thoughtful about how they've developed this standard and tool. So, on that point, I'd say I'm pleased to see so many people participating on the webinar today. And further to Chanel's point about the need for momentum, really coming when the spinning mills start to receive this request from multiple clients. We hope that some of the brands that are listening in today will consider piloting YESS in their supply chains as the standard is rolled out.
Great, thank you, Kelly. Now I'm going to turn it back over to Patricia, who will go over the proposed future activities we have for YESS.
Thanks, Maren, and thanks to both Kelly and Chanel for your comments and your support. We really appreciate it and couldn't do any of this without you both. Okay, first, we have a lot of work ahead of us, but we plan to develop several program elements. We need to refine and expand guidance documents that were requested by the spinners during the feasibility assessments and develop collection data tools as well as draft KPIs for the program. We plan to define auditor requirements, develop auditor training, and establish an approval process for auditors. We will also create a full assessment process for the spinners, including initial engagement, corrective actions, approval, and future re-audits. We will conduct training sessions for spinners and auditors, and then, ideally, we will conduct a full round of pilot assessments with trained auditors in September and October of this year. I say ideally because we need all of you to participate with us to make all those pilot assessments happen. We plan to formalize partnerships and collaborations. We will determine the most appropriate way to coordinate our efforts and develop partnerships with existing apparel and cotton initiatives, such as the SLCP, the Social Labor Convergence Project, BCI, Cotton Made in Africa, GOTS, Fair Trade, and others. We have worked hard to make sure our YESS standard does not duplicate but complements and strengthens other initiatives. Now we need to determine the specific and most effective way to collaborate. And for those of you wondering, the Responsible Sourcing Network is a member of both the Better Cotton Initiative as well as the Sustainable Apparel Coalition and a SLCP signatory. For the farm-level schemes, we need to evaluate their approaches and assurance methodologies and conduct our own due diligence on their efforts so that we are confident there is no forced labor on any of their verified farms. Next, we need to update our financial sustainability plan by mapping and forecasting annual corporate membership and other revenue streams and determining costs of spinner assessments and coordination. Although an industry-wide approach will be cost-effective for brands and spinners, we need funding to get a YESS program off the ground and to make sure our costs are covered and our financial model is sustainable over the long term. We plan on managing YESS activities by expanding the YESS team. We will transition our working group to a multi-stakeholder steering committee with guidance from the ICL Codes of Good Practice. And we are inviting others to join our steering committee at this time. We are currently soliciting YESS founding partners, and we plan to create a YESS membership to allow the industry to support and benefit from YESS's efforts. And of course, we need to expand our staff to coordinate future trainings, audits, and research. We plan on implementing, revising, and integrating the YESS initiative. If all goes well, we plan to roll out YESS assessments of spinning mills globally in Q1 of 2020. We will investigate if and when it makes sense to integrate with existing apparel or a cotton initiative. And finally, as with any standard, we will review and revise it, the standard and the workbook in a few years. As you can see, we have a lot of ground to cover. It has been several years in the making, and we are only just getting started. Our goals are ambitious, but we firmly believe they are warranted, and the time for YESS is upon us. We are actively asking brands, cotton traders, foundations, and others to contribute to the success of the YESS initiative by becoming a founding partner or participating in whatever capacity you have. Founding partners will contribute financially to the rollout of YESS, have a seat on the YESS steering committee, be closely involved with driving the implementation and the development of the YESS program for the industry. And if you are a brand or retailer, you will be allowed to have nominated spinning mills prioritized to undergo YESS assessments, either for the pilot phase or for full assessments. We are also looking for engagement by NGO stakeholders and academics to sit on either the YESS steering committee or an assessment committee, which would come into existence in 2020. As I mentioned when I first started, I invite you to support YESS financially or get involved as a stakeholder. This will allow you to meet your company's anti-slavery compliance requirements, increase demand for cotton from the farm level initiatives, support a transparent supply chain, and help eliminate modern slavery from cotton production globally. If you'd like to join us in the future development and rollout of the YESS program, please contact me directly. My information is on the last screen. Now we will open it up to questions. As a reminder, please type a question into the platform or raise your hand. And I see that we do have one question that has come in already, which is directed to you, Liz, and it's how does a spinner access the training for the workbook?
Thank you for the question. We actually do have a couple of trainings recorded that we provided to spinning mills, if I am correct, Maren. However, I would like to just point out that the workbook has been slightly modified. I mentioned that we bundled the sub-questions in the workbook for ease of completion and review. So that was a result of the feasibility assessment. So the trainings that you would be able to listen to would have that one difference, that the sub-questions were listed all separately, but that is available. And as Patricia said, moving forward, we do hope to be able to provide additional trainings. So please let us know if you're interested, and we will let you know when future trainings are available to you.
Thanks, Liz. And I'll just, to point people in the direction of make sure you can find it easily, on the Responsible Sourcing Network website, sourcingnetwork.org, you can access the YESS page. So it's sourcingnetwork.org/YESS, or on the homepage, there's a link directly to the YESS page. And on the YESS page is a whole list of materials and resources, which includes FAQs, the methodology for determining high-risk countries, a link directly to all the YESS webinars, which includes the YESS webinar 1 and 2 that we did with the spinners, as Liz mentioned, and several other resources. So we do encourage you to go there and take a look at what we offer. We also have a really great short video if you're interested or if you want to share that with others, as well as a 2-page concept note if you need to also share that internally. All right, Chanel, I have a question for you, which is how hard was it and for you to know who all your spinners are, especially if a textile mill purchases its yarn?
So that's something we're continuing to investigate in our own supply chain. We've done work for the traceability program at VF. We've been surveying our textile mills and identifying spinning mills in our supply chain for about 2 years now. And so we're still working towards 100% transparency into all of our spinning mills. And so that was another opportunity we saw with YESS, is if we could develop this industry-wide list of verified spinning mills that are part of the YESS program, that would get us a lot closer to achieving that level of transparency, because it's an ongoing process for us right now.
Thanks, Chanel. This is Patricia, and I would also say that I know to identify all the smelters in the conflict minerals supply chain, there was a lot of effort by multiple electronics companies and others to all put the smelters that they had identified into one central location, so that the engagement then with those smelters could be done on an industry-wide level. But really identifying them all is definitely, I know, was a big lift. Some of you may know that the Open Apparel Registry is going to be launched later this month, and I have been in touch with those folks. And I think that it's going to be a great tool where we could start to collaborate and have the spinning mills that are identified mapped out in that tool, so that we could start engaging them on an industry-wide basis. As both Chanel and Kelly mentioned, if we have multiple brands and agents and others all engaging and asking the spinning mills to go through this type of assessment, it's going to be a lot easier than every brand having to do it on their own. And we're excited for a tool like Open Apparel Registry, so that that information could also be together in one location, as well as we know that through the Sustainable Apparel Coalition, as well as Better Cotton Initiative, that they also both have started identifying and have spinning mills as their partners and members of their organization. So we definitely, as I mentioned earlier, don't want to duplicate efforts. We want to see how we can pool all of this information together. Liz, did you have anything else to add to that?
No, other than I think that there is a trend for brands to be to disclose their suppliers further down the supply chain. I know most have done it to the first tier. Some have gone to the second tier. The third tier spinners is coming, I'm sure.
And I have been in touch also with SAC in regards to and applying both the social HIG module as well as the SLCP. And they, although I know a lot of focus is on first tier right now, their intention eventually is to include, I was told, all the way to gin level, not farms, but starting facility modules with gins, which is, I think, is a great idea. After visiting some of the gins, some of them definitely could use some improvement. Okay, we have another question asking if we eventually see this being expanded to other commodities. And although this one's taking a lot of energy out of me, I would like to say that I would like to see it expanded to other commodities. I think if we have a successful model that's been already proven with conflict minerals and or responsible mineral sourcing in general, because that's now expanding beyond just tin, tantalum, tungsten, and gold, and we can demonstrate that we could do it in cotton, I do think that there's an opportunity to expand it to other commodities such as sugar or pig iron, et cetera, those in particular that are known to have forced labor in the production of their raw commodities. Fisheries, I know, is something Liz is quite passionate about. The challenge is that every industry is quite diverse and unique, and really looking at those the control points, or like the gatekeeper, as Chanel said, in my opinion, is really important to have that aspect in the middle of the supply chain, have those entities trained and educated and realize what their responsibilities are for due diligence. And some industries are more scattered than others. I think with the conflict minerals, it's actually fairly narrow, whereas mills, where we don't have a handle on the exact number of spinning mills in the world, but I was told it's probably around 10,000 that are commercially viable that will want to engage. I think it's Tamil Nadu alone in India, there's like 2,000. So we definitely have a really big lift. That's why I think doing it together as an industry is the way to go. Liz, do you want to talk about other commodities at all?
I'd love to just share that I was able to support OECD conduct the alignment assessment of the Sustainable Apparel Coalition's brand module and the HIG, how to HIG this past year. Any of you that are familiar with the SAC brand module or were able to review the findings of that assessment will know that due diligence, the brand module warrants a bit of refinement to really align with OECD due diligence. And through a true due diligence, a brand would identify other commodities or raw materials that warrant some program of some sort of due diligence based on risk. So if you are a company that works with synthetics, the risks may be different, but going through a due diligence framework and due diligence process would enable you to hone in on exactly what risks that material poses, and then hopefully the industry would come together to develop an industry-wide initiative so that not every brand is taking it on their own. So we encourage you to come back and talk to us if you do identify some significant risks of raw materials in your products and you'd be interested in developing a standard like this. I'm not saying we've got 2 years to do it today, but we could certainly advise and provide some input.
Thanks, Liz. Another question said, did you say that the spinning list would be publicly available? So today we don't have a list of spinners, but eventually we would like to make it publicly available, or maybe have it designated on the Open Apparel Registry, for example, something like that. I ideally would like to follow the Responsible Minerals Initiative model, which has a list of compliant or conformant smelters and refiners on their website. And it has who all the active smelters and refiners are, as well as those that are conformant or those that are going through corrective actions, and with links to their conflict mineral policies, for example. So in an ideal world, we could build out something like that, or coordinate it or incorporate it into one of the other initiatives, such as SAC or SLCP or BCI or something, or host it ourselves. We're pretty open to figuring out what is going to work for the industry and what we can cover financially. So we are a nonprofit, or I like to say a for-benefit organization, but we can't do this by ourselves. That's why we're asking the industry to partner with us and join us, because it will be less expensive and more efficient to coordinate this as an industry and have, pay an annual membership fee, for example, than it would be sending any of your own audit teams or hiring for, auditors for each brand to go and do this themselves. So yes, eventually we'd like to have a spinning list available, but it's not available yet. Liz, one for you in regards, it says, how are spinners supposed to know or engage farmers if the cotton is coming from China and it's not better cotton?
That is the question, isn't it, of the day? Yeah, so we do know, we knew going in, and it certainly was confirmed that spinners do not have a whole lot of leverage over international merchants. And generally, a spinner will be purchasing cotton from another country through a merchant. So and I'm quite passionate about engaging merchants in these solutions. And I think with the brands behind the spinners will have some leverage. So we really do need to come together. And as I say, when I speak of the minerals initiative that I've been involved with for 10 years now, the reason the supply chain is taking action is because 80% of the market is requiring them to do that. So we do need to support the spinners, and that support really does need to come from the brands. As far as the question down, what is the spinner really going to know within China? They will. Every gin is identified on a bale of cotton, so they will know the gin. And there would need to be some due diligence on the ground in the region of that gin to understand what cotton is actually in that bale of cotton. So it will take work. We are, I say, sober in the real recognizing that spinners themselves will not be able to get to that level of detail, but hopefully with the support of brands, spinners will be able to request this from the merchants, and the merchants do have relationships within these countries of origin. I'm not going to get into more detail at this point in time. It's complicated, but it's actually could be simplified in that much as well. So merchants will have to be involved.
Thanks, Liz. And similar to success in having spinners go through this process, I think engaging merchants and traders together as an industry, we're going to have a lot more leverage with them than any one brand would. So that's another reason why I invite you to join our efforts. I see David Schilling had his hand up. David, do you still have a question? We'll go ahead and unmute you.
Oh. Yes, sorry. Hello? Can you hear me?
Oh,
can you hear
yes.
me?
Oh,
I'm
okay. Sorry.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead. Yes,
okay,
we can hear you, David. Go ahead.
Yeah, listen, this has been a great webinar. I just love the process, the UNGP's human rights due diligence via the OECD guidance embedded into the YESS program. I mean, it's really tremendous. I guess the question is, and it follows up with some of the issues that you presented, which I think are so right on in terms of more collective action to move this forward. But I wondered, how would you assess the amount of kind of capacity building for the spinners that it would be needed for them to really be able to embed the YESS standards in their business model and practice?
I'll start with this one, Patricia. Thank you, David, and thank you for your kind words. One of the most positive ahas we had during the feasibility and research that we did over a couple of years was realizing that spinners have many of the components of a management system in place. The documents to validate the origin of the cotton are shared routinely and reviewed routinely by spinners. So many of those aspects of what we're asking spinners to do, they're already doing. And we certainly want to build off, and we've designed the standard and the workbooks and trainings built off what the industry is already doing. Really, the tough part is sourcing from the 9 high-risk countries, which produce a lot of the world's cotton.
Mm-hmm.
And it's important to understand and to clarify, which we weren't able to do on this call, this webinar, is that the spinner is allowed to continue to source from a high-risk country as long as they're taking action to improve things on the ground, if you would, in that country. Again, with partnership, we hope, through merchants. And the other thing I should also note is we are hoping that the farm level schemes, whether it be Cotton Made in Africa, Better Cotton Initiative, all the others, are able to expand within these high-risk countries. And over time, they would own and be able to give us assurance that anything produced, say, in China through BCI, and as BCI takes more volume of China's production, we're addressing the issue that we're aiming to address. So does that answer your question, at least partially? Or Patricia, would you like to add?
The only other thing, great. Well, David, anything else?
Yeah, go ahead.
I'd like to say that this, approach and the spinners asking for the verified cotton from these high-risk countries, in particular, lower-risk countries, were not as concerned from cotton coming from Australia or Brazil, for example. But if the spinners start asking for more cotton that's verified with one of those farm level schemes, and we need those farm level schemes for YESS to be successful, we think it will then help drive demand for even more BCI coming from China and India and Pakistan, for example.
Great. Thank you.
Good, thanks. I have Charles. I know you typed something in, but why don't you go ahead and make your announcement, and then we'll wrap up this webinar.
Yes, thank you. My announcement will be very short, but very important. My name is Charles Alexander Frey. I'm working at the Economic and Trade Division here at the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe. We're working at collaborating and enhancing transparency and traceability in the garment and footwear sector, so a more general approach to the one that we're looking at right now. And we have a meeting on the 4th of April, and if you're interested in sharing your experience, sharing what you want to say, you can send an email to me at charles.frey, F-R-E-I, charles.frey, F-R-E-I, @un.org. That's all for me. Thank you very much. On the 4th of April.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Charles. You could put that in the chat to everybody, too, if you want, to make sure they have your email address. And with that, I just want to actually turn it back over to Maren to close our webinar. Oh, Maren.
Hi, can you hear me?
Oh, yep, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today, and thank you for all these great questions. In closing, I'd like to say thank you to all of our speakers, Liz, Patricia, Chanel, and Kelly. We would like to extend a special thank you to all of the financial supporters that made the development of the YESS standard possible, especially the Walt Disney Company's Supply Chain Investment Program, Humanity United, and individual contributors to RSN. Lastly, we want to thank all of those who contributed comments and inputs during the development phase, especially the staff of the spinning mills that Liz and Patricia visited. Be sure to stay in touch and reach out to us directly if you would like to become involved with the YESS initiative. Goodbye.
All right, thanks.
Oops.
Okay,